Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. In this video, I'm going to be going over my Archmage Lightning Conduit Hierophant I made in Crucible Solo Self-Found League. Now, this build is not something I think I would recommend trying to recreate in the current state of the game because, in my opinion, for any of these really heavily mana-focused builds, there really isn't a good amount of mana regeneration in the game to sustain you. The only way I got this build to really work was through a Crucible tree node that gave me 0.6% of mana regen per second. So that 0.6% then factors through any increased mana regeneration rate I get. So that winds up stacking to be a lot of mana regen. And without that, this build just doesn't work. And I also have a synthesized wand here giving me an additional 0.2 mana regen per second. Now, the way that Lightning Conduit works is it kind of detonates and removes shocks on enemies in a really big AoE. You can kind of see traveling on the ground here. But Lightning Conduit itself cannot shock. So you have to use another skill to shock, in which I am using Orb of Storms. So this build to clear maps is a little wonky because I kind of have to stay within my Orb of Storms no matter where I go, and it just kind of makes it awkward to play through maps, but it is also the highest damage on a character I was able to achieve in SSF Crucible League. So before I get into all the gearing, passive tree, whatnot, we'll throw in a Forge of the Phoenix map. Nothing crazy here. Cursed with Enfeeble, so I'm losing a little bit of damage, but you'll get to see what the baseline of it is here, see how it plays. So if I just run through here, I cast, well, I got a shock with the Frostblink. If I just cast Lightning Conduit, it doesn't do anything. It has to have a shock on the enemy. So I have to put down the Orb of Storms, or there needs to be another player with me that can shock enemies. And I tried several things here to try and get the best shocks off using a Shock Nova, and I really wanted Skitterbots to work. But with Skitterbots, even though there's an aura that shocks enemies on one of them, when the shock is removed from the Skitterbots, it does not reapply the shock on the enemy that you hit with the Lightning Conduit. So Orb of Storms wound up being the best for me for shocking enemies, running around, getting it done. I was also recommended to maybe look into Stormbrand, as it can shock, but it doesn't have quite the area of effect that Orb of Storms does. And I've always kind of known Stormbrand to kind of tickle enemies, and you get lots of hits off really fast. I think Orb of Storms definitely gets a bigger hit and a bigger shock off. So I went with the Orb of Storms. Now, this build is also min-maxed to as crazy of a degree I could get in SSF Crucible, but at this point I've dropped all of my defenses, so I don't have shock immunity anymore. I don't have attack and spell block for defenses. I got it to level 95 and said, okay, I'm going all in on the damage for this build, and I will include both Path of Building links from before and after I made the jump into this crazy nonsense that is this passive tree that I'll go over in a second. But this build also really surprised me when leveling. I didn't use any gear that I had farmed throughout the league, and it absolutely crushed leveling through the campaign. So also in the video description will be links to all the videos from the progression of this character. The first of those, when I leveled it, you could see how strong Lightning Conduit was going through the campaign, and then it ends up getting here, and here's a Phoenix kind of zap zap zap, and then if the Orb of Storms runs out, I'm kind of dead. I have the Sigil of Power. See, Orb of Storms went out. And I think I got that last shock off with the Frostblink. So that is what I've got going on with this build. Great boss damage. Kind of strange map clear, but it gets it done. So to go over the gearing of this character. So for any Archmage build, your best in slot amulet is going to be an Ad-Series Foible, as it gives you flat mana, it gives you a percentage of increased mana, and insane amounts of mana regeneration rate. And then items and gems have reduced attribute requirements, so you're not going to be as strapped on strength and dexterity across the rest of your build. So this amulet is kind of mandatory. There's other ways you can build out an Archmage build than I did, but I went with an Ivory Tower build. This chest piece causes you to gain energy shield for every 100 reserved life, and chaos damage is then taken from mana before life. So any chaos damage I take will come from my mana, and if I run out of mana, it will pull from the 88 life I have unreserved here, but I'm reserving over 2,000 life, so I'm getting a bunch of energy shield from that. Now, since I'm on low life here, I'm also using a Lori's Lantern, causing damage of enemies hitting me to be unlucky, giving me a good chunk of chaos resistance and all res as well. So those are kind of the three main staples here outside of the crazy mana regen Crucible wand. Now, normally to make an Ivory Tower build, you want a Prism Guardian shield. And in SSF, I was not able to get one of those this league. So instead, I had to improvise, and I have a shaped shield that has socketed gems have 30% increased reservation efficiency on it. Otherwise, the shield's doing nothing crazy. Crucible tree had nothing there, but this 30% increased reservation efficiency allowed me to put my clarity and discipline with an arrogance support and reserve those on my life. Now, if you have the Prism Guardian shield, this opens up almost a whole nother aura. Now, if the league is ended and I went back into standard solo self-found, I have a Prism Guardian shield. This shield causes socketed gems to reserve life instead of mana, as well as the 30% increased reservation efficiency that I have on this shield. The big difference here is you don't have to use the arrogance support. Arrogance has a 201% cost and reservation multiplier. So the normal reservation of these skills is not that much. And just to demonstrate here, I'll put the shield on, put my clarity in here, put my discipline in here, remove this shield, and then turn them both back on. And look how much extra life I have there to reserve. 774 life there. So you could easily just fit in a whole nother like 50% aura because of the Prism Guardian shield. That's a zealotry. That's more damage for the build. But you might not be able to do it, and I actually managed to pull it off without the Prism Guardian, which is crazy. I didn't think it would actually come together as nicely as it did. So going through my other gear here, I have life, mana, movement speed on my boots with damage penetrates, elemental resistances. If you haven't killed recently, that's good for bossing. Gloves have a bunch of mana, a bunch of resistances, +1 to socketed AoE gems, and this is where my Orb of Storms is at. Helmet has a lot of energy shield, damage penetrates lightning res, lightning to spells, and there's also mana as well as energy shield on this. So I've got flat mana everywhere I could get it, including on my belt, extra chaos resistance against damage over time here. The only thing I needed on this belt was strength, mana. I don't need the life, though having life on gear like the boots is good because the more life you have, the more you can reserve, the more energy shield you get from that. So the wand is nothing super crazy. You could have +1 to all lightning spell gems with flat lightning and the flat mana with cast speed even, but there's nothing crazy here. I used an essence to get the lightning damage to spells. It hit some mana, crafted spell damage, and called it a day. It worked out. And the last piece of gear here is my Sapphire Ring that is Crusader influenced, allowing me to curse enemies with conductivity on hit. a little bit of extra lightning damage per power charge, more mana here, reduced effective curse. This is a really nice ring that I was able to craft. And my jewel has flat mana regen per second, which scales with all my mana regen, mana regeneration rate while moving, as well as a little bit of extra lightning damage for spells while holding a shield. So this is really like going all out, get as much mana regeneration as possible. So now for the gem links. Lightning Conduit, I have level 21. Linked with Archmage support 2020, and then this causes the supported skills to have a mana cost equal to 5% of unreserved max mana, and then you gain added lightning damage based on the amount of mana you spend. So this costs 693 mana. 693 mana times 0.75 is 519 flat lightning damage to spells from using Archmage with the current setup I have here. Also, I'm using Elemental Focus. This causes supported skills not to be able to inflict elemental ailments, and Lightning Conduit cannot inflict shock anyways, so this is just more damage. I'm using Cruelty because I did not have a better support gem to put in here. This gave more damage with hits. Even though I'm not using any kind of dot build, I'm not scaling the Cruelty in any way. This is just 24% more damage with hits. Arcane Surge gives more spell damage while I have Arcane Surge, more cast speed, and a bunch of increased mana regeneration rate. And since this is with my Archmage setup, I gain Arcane Surge every single time I cast it, and I was able to level the Arcane Surge gem up, giving it increased mana regeneration rate. And then lastly, I have Lightning Penetration support. An Awakened Lightning Pin would be nice here, but SSF things, this is where it ended up there. So in the gloves, the Orb of Storms is linked with Chain, so that the beams that come off of the Orb of Storms can hit more enemies at once, as well as Overcharge, causing the Orb of Storms to deal less damage, giving it 50% chance to shock, and it shocks enemies as though dealing 690% more damage. So getting big shocks off of there with the Overcharge. And then Unbound Ailments has increased effect of non-damaging ailments on enemies, so that I can get the biggest shocks off possible from the Orb of Storms. My helmet, I have Sigil of Power and Arcane Cloak. Those are both linked with a level 4 Enhance. The quality on Arcane Cloak gives increased skill effect duration, and quality on Sigil of Power gives increased area of effect. And I also have increased duration here, so like I can extend the Arcane Cloak duration. It is like just under 7 seconds that I can keep that up, and as long as I'm not taking damage from enemies hitting me while I have the Arcane Cloak up, I can keep all of the flat lightning damage that Arcane Cloak gives me, and it's not going to refresh as fast, so I won't be spending this large chunk of mana all the time if I can keep the Arcane Cloak up longer, as well as keeping the Sigil of Power down longer. Sigil of Power gains stages when you spend mana in the area, and since my skill costs over 400 mana, every time I cast each second, it'll gain a stack. Each stack gives flat lightning damage, 7 to 141, and then enemies in the area deal 19% less damage while it's at max stages. So I can keep this up, and if I stay in this area, I stay within the Orb of Storms. This is kind of the area I have to work in to do damage against single targets. Now for the aura setup, I have Wrath linked with Eternal Blessing. Eternal Blessing allows a linked skill to have no reservation cost, but you cannot reserve mana, which is really nice for an Archmage build like this, since I'm reserving a bunch of stuff on my life, and then I just get an extra free aura because I'm not using any other reservations on the mana. And then I have Clarity, Discipline linked with Arrogance in the shield, and I also have a Vitality linked with another Arrogance, as well as my Frostblink being there, unlinked with anything. This Vitality was to just creep as much life down as I could, and as it went to a certain level threshold, it wound up hitting another 100 life reserved, giving me that extra 30 max energy shield. So that is kind of how the build all sets up and works. And again, Prism Guardian is a thing that you can do. You can get Skyforth boots in Trade League. Those are also a really rare pair of boots. You get reservation efficiency off of that, as well as a bunch of mana there. You can also use Algor Mortis gloves to further increase the damage potential of this, but you have to work a cold snap into the build to create a big chilling area on the ground, and then enemies take increased lightning damage. Then you'll be able to sap enemies, lowering the damage that they can deal, and more increased effective non-damaging ailments from using these. This is like the final min-maxing piece is trying to fit these Algor Mortis gloves into this build that already has so many unique pieces in it. Something I did a long time ago with Stormbrand, but that is there. And then now I will jump into the passive tree, and I will mention again that I originally had Tempest Shield in here worked into the life reservation, and it had to take the place of the clarity, and then I couldn't have the vitality in here. So it's a lot of difference there to get it all to work. So there will be a different path of building linked for that setup in the description. So I am a Hierophant here. I have Arcane Blessing, allowing Arcane Surge to grant 20% more spell damage to me. Conviction of Power, guaranteeing me 4 power charges and endurance charges. Really good defensive setup there. Divine Guidance gives a percentage of increased mana. Damage is taken from mana before life. And Transfiguration of Mind. Transfiguration of Mind causes increases and reductions to max mana to also apply to damage at 30% their value. So by getting increases to mana, I'm also getting increases to damage. Not just from the Archmage support gem, but also just from mana on the tree. And then lastly, Sanctuary of Thought gives 20% of maximum mana as extra maximum energy shield, but also 50% less mana cost of skills. So this makes the skill cost less, so I'm not getting as much flat lightning from the Archmage support, but since I have so much mana, I'm getting a bunch of extra energy shield from here as well. So for the passives here, I have life, mana regeneration rate, life and mana, mana regen, life regen, into sanctity, more energy shield, life regen. I needed this life here because like you getting the amount of life you need to fit all the auras in is kind of tricky, and I wound up needing these life nodes to pull that off, and I grabbed Holy Dominion. This is giving a 10% chance to shock, giving me extra elemental damage, extra resistances there. Retribution has damage, attack and cast speed, strength, intelligence. Intelligence is also mana. Then pushing up towards quick recovery, there's life and mana regeneration rate in these nodes. Essence extraction is very important for any mana focused build, as you get increased mana recovery rate during effect of any mana flask. This is really important because this is not increased mana regen, this is increased mana recovery rate. That is a more multiplier on all of the mana regen you have. So while the flask is up, I'm getting extra mana recovery from having Essence Extraction. An absolutely vital node for an Archmage build. And then there's the Watcher's Eye. This Watcher's Eye rolled with double clarity mods in SSF. It was crazy. So I'm getting a percentage of max mana as extra energy shield while affected by clarity here, so that is more stacking of mana, giving me energy shield. And then a chance to recover 10% of mana when you use a skill. That's more recovery of mana for me there. Going down towards the Scion area, I grabbed the top side of this mana wheel here. This is increasing mana cost of skills, giving extra mana regen rate and more mana. I grabbed Ash, Frost, and Storm. This is increased effect of non-damaging ailments. Another 10% chance to shock enemies. So now with the overcharge support, Holy Dominion, and Ash, Frost, and Storm, I'm up to 70% chance to shock without needing crit on the Orb of Storms. And then I'm taking reduced reflected elemental damage here because I fought Uber at Ziri, and this should be an extra lightning exposure from what I have on my gloves. The minus 11 to lightning resistance from the exposure here gets bumped up to 18. That's another 7 lightning resistance off of the enemies, which is really nice. Then Shaper has mana regeneration rate. I took the Scion mana nodes here, and a jewel that has corrupting blood cannot be inflicted on me. Spell damage while holding a shield, some resistances, and increased mana there as well. Pushing across Foresight here, this is all energy shield. The Mastery is 2% energy shield recharge per second. Thrill Killer over here gives more mana, recover 2% of mana on kill, further helping to sustain the mana in maps, and then pushing up another jewel, which is the Impossible Escape, which allowed me to allocate passives inside this radius around minion instability. Very min-maxy stuff there, but then I grabbed Pain Attunement since I'm on low life. That's another 30% more spell damage while I'm on low life. So pushing up from this intersection here, we get Insightfulness, which is Energy Shield and Mana, another Energy Shield Mastery for increased ES from Equipped Helmet. A lot of Energy Shield on this helmet gives a lot of extra there, so it's a really good node to take. I needed this Dexterity. I grabbed Elemental Overload, so if I crit, I get 40% more elemental damage, and I don't need to crit to get the shocks off, so I'd rather have the extra damage. I grabbed Crackling Speed for lightning damage and cast speed, and then plus 15% of the max effective shock on this lightning mastery. So that puts the upper bound of shock up to 65%, and the idea is to get as close to that every single time Orb of Storms shocks an enemy. You want that 65% shock. Moving to the left, out on the Templar side, I grabbed Zealot's Oath, so all of the life regen I got at the start of the Templar and in quick recovery, that all goes to my energy shield. And then increased effect of Arcane Surge gives me more damage from this gem in here and more mana regeneration rate as well. Now there's more mana nodes in Dynamo. You get Guard Skill Duration here, if you could work that in. There's more mana nodes in Battle Ruse here. There's Mana Flask nodes. There's mana nodes all over the place. So there's a lot of different ways you can branch this, but I wound up freeing up a lot of points to fit in this Cluster Jewel setup with this Thread of Hope and the Impossible Escape here. Now, originally, I was pathing through all of this and getting a lot of the things that are allocated here, which are in the second path of building linked in the description. But pushing across the top here, Unnatural Calm, increased max energy shield, +1 to lightning res, and then stun thresholds based on energy shield instead of life, so that I'm not getting stunned if I get hit. Grab Deep Thoughts. This is mana regeneration. Push up for Breath of Lightning. This is a lot of increased effect of lightning ailments, so this is better shocks as well. And another mastery causing increases and reductions to maximum mana, also apply to shock effect at 30% their value. So mana gives me not only mana, it gives me damage, and it's also giving me shock effect by stacking all this mana. The lightning mastery there is very solid, and I originally pushed all the way up the left side to get Heart of Thunder, but the Thread of Hope allowed for that. I grabbed this single spell damage per power charge node. This is 16% spell damage with my 4 power charges that I have permanently being a Hierophant. And then there is the Thread of Hope. So this is kind of a mess. It's really wonky. I originally pushed out here along the edge to get the 15% chance to shock, 20% increased effect of lightning ailments, and static blows, which is more effect of lightning ailments. And originally I needed an extra lightning mastery to cause shocks you inflict to spread to other enemies within a radius of 10. And instead, I was able to get this on my gloves. So shocks you inflict spread to other enemies. That really works nicely with the Orb of Storms, so all of the zaps it does will actually spread to a larger group of enemies, giving big shock potential for the hordes that this game can throw at you. I have Essence Surge linked with the Impossible Escape, more energy shield, faster start of ES recharge, and it is also hitting Prodigal Perfection. This gives up to 40% increased damage as long as you have over 2,000 mana on top of the 20% increased max mana there. And then the Thread of Hope is hitting the mana regen on this node, as well as Arcane Will. Another flat 5 mana regen, 30% max mana. Originally, I was pathing through all of this. I was getting the spell block, and I was coming down here, getting Arcane Focus. Like, all of this was kind of all linked together, getting all of these things. And all of those passive points that I freed up with these two jewels became the cluster jewel setup. Now, the cluster jewels that you can get for an Archmage build are pretty disgusting. So with a lightning large cluster, you can get Scintillating Idea and Storm Drinker. These are both notable passives that give you lightning penetration. And Storm Drinker gives lightning damage, leeches energy shield, and Scintillating Idea gives 20% increased max mana. So if you can get these two nodes on a large cluster jewel, fantastic. Those are the two nodes you really need to get things to pop. Then the medium cluster jewel I'm using here is increased effect of non-damaging ailments, and here I have Overshock, giving me increased lightning damage and increased effect of lightning ailments, more increased effect of non-damaging ailments to further push the shocks up. And then I have two small mana cluster jewels, and these can also roll Scintillating Idea, which is the same that can roll on the large cluster. 20% max mana, damage penetrates 5% of lightning resistance. And the same is over here, Scintillating Idea. And I'm also like squeezing my resistances out of these jewels as well on these small nodes. Like getting every little bit that I can to free up all the gear possible. I think that is pretty much it there. I am anointing Stormweaver. Stormweaver here gives me 25% increased lightning damage. Enemies shocked or frozen by you take 5% increased elemental damage. And like all this being said, shock also increases damage enemies take, right? So up to 65% increased damage taken from the shock itself. So a lot of damage packed into this build. It's a lot of fun. It's really complicated as Archmage builds are. I tried to explain everything the best I could, and I guess the only thing left to do here is maybe throw it at a real boss. If I can find my fragments in this mess. Here we go. Let's go fight Sirus. It's not Uber Sirus. I'm not experienced enough to handle Ubers, and this build is, even at this level, is not geared to the point to be able to handle Ubers, at least not with the mechanical knowledge of how to deal with things. I'm also just now thinking of it. I believe there is a clarity mod that you can get on Watcher's Eyes that give you this increased mana recovery rate while affected by clarity. If you can get that mod with the max mana as extra energy shield while affected by clarity, then you can probably pull this off without having this mana regen. I think that would probably suffice, but that double clarity jewel is going to be like double, if not triple digit divine cost easily because it's rare. But now we can zap Sirus with some big shocks, try and stay inside my Sigil of Power, and just zap away, and there we go, phased. Just like that. Run under him again. Drop the next Sigil Power. Start charging it up. Put down the Orb of Storms. Zap. Oh, he moved within the Orb of Storms. Just zap away. Should be like phased. There we go. Sirus can actually kill me here because I don't have spell suppression. I have 8% spell block. So, kind of yikes. Round number 3. Zap away. Get the elemental overload up. Yeah, those hits hurt from the die beam. In the final phase here. Stay inside the Orb of Storms and hold down right click. You move to here. Move the thing. Keep an eye on him. He moved here. Die beam coming soon. Dodge it. And then this fight's almost over. And I can even do damage to him in this phase. He gets big damage reduction while in that little tunnel. And boom, Awakener's Orb and a Cootie. I call this a Cootie because C-O-T-I-E. Crown of the Ember died. So Sirus has Cooties. Haha. And there we go. that is the Archmage Lightning Conduit Hierophant, and that's going to do it for this guide. I'd like to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, definitely hit the like button, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss more videos from me. If you'd like to help support my channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon just below the video, or by joining to become a member. And I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.